We're going to multiply using distribution. First of all, we have 2 times this term here. So what happens is that the 2 gets multiplied with every term that's in here. We have 1, 2, 3 terms. So the 2 is going to multiply by each of those. So let's kind of show the mapping of the multiplication the 2 is going to take. Okay, it's going to multiply with this term, and this term. So when you multiply 2 times an x squared, let's show what that looks like. 2 multiplied with an x squared simply makes 2x squared. When you multiply a 2, let's use parentheses this time. Multiply 2 times a negative 2x. What happens is that you have an arrangement. The 2 and the negative 2 multiply, and that gives you a negative 4 with an x. Okay, so that becomes a negative 4 and x. And finally, when you multiply a 2 and a negative 3, here to here, the 2 times 3 is 6. And when you multiply by one negative, you're going to get a negative. So it's going to be a negative 6. And that's finished. Okay, let's look at the next one. We're multiplying an x here with the quantity x squared minus 2x minus 3. So we're going to start the distribution. So we got 3 terms to distribute by. So the x will go here, here, and there. So first we're going to get an x times an x squared, and which is basically saying x times x times x, and that is equivalent to x cubed. So this is going to be x cubed. Next, we're going to have an x times a negative 2x. Okay, if I were to rearrange this, because for multiplication you can change order, you can say this is negative 2, this is x, and this is x when you change the order. So negative 2 here, and the x times x can be simplified to x squared. So x times negative 2x is negative 2x squared. And finally, when you multiply an x times a negative 3, okay, x times a negative 3, which is here to here, we can rewrite that as a negative 3 multiplied with an x. Just change the order just to make sure this looks like a coefficient and an x. So negative 3x, and we're done. Okay, next we have a 6x squared multiplied with an x squared, a negative 2x, and a minus 3. So we have 3 terms here, so that means we have 3 distributions. Here, here, and there. So let's take a look at each of those products. So first, we're going to have a 6x squared multiplied with an x squared. So let's put everything in parentheses so you can kind of see everything. So when we multiply this, this is essentially a 6 multiplied with an x squared times an x squared. Now, an x squared times an x squared is really an x times x times x times x times x. And that becomes 6 and x to the 4th. So this is going to be 6x to the 4th. 6x squared times a negative 2x would look like this. 6x squared multiplied with a negative 2x. We can rewrite this as a 6 multiplied with the negative 2, and then move back the x squared times the x here in the back. So the 6 times 2 is 12, and when you multiply by one negative, you'll get a negative answer. The x squared times x is really an x times x times x. So what we have, I should have written that lower, sorry about that, negative 12x cubed. So negative 12x cubed. And finally, we have a 6x squared multiplied with a negative 3, which essentially means we're multiplying the 6 and the negative 3, and the x squared is right there. So the 6 times 3 is 18. Multiply by one negative, you get negative. And so 18 times x squared. So let's write negative 18 times x squared, and we're done. Okay, lastly, we have a 6x multiplied with a negative x squared plus 2x minus 4. You notice there's a missing number here. Let me raise this up a little bit. There's a missing number here, so I can put an understood 1 there. Kind of help the process a little bit. So this is a 6x multiplied with a negative 1 x squared. For multiplication again, because associative property, we can move around things. This will give us a 6 times negative 1, and over here we have an x times x squared. So 6 times 1 is 6. When you multiply by 1 negative, you get negative. X times x squared is actually x times x, which is x cubed. So this is negative 6x cubed. So negative 6x cubed. Next, we have our 6x multiplying. Let's see, we're here, here, and then there. Next, we have our 6x multiplying with our 2x. So let's show that process right here. Yeah, it's getting bad. All right, so I can rearrange this using associative property, and this will be a 6 times a 2, and over here will be x times x. The 6 times 2 gives us a 12, and that's going to be a positive because there's no negatives around. And the x times x gives us an x squared. So this is going to be a positive 12x squared. And finally, you have a 6x multiplied with a negative 4. Okay, and again, we're going to associate the 6 and the negative 4, just kind of move them over, and then the x gets moved to the back. And so 6 times 4 is 24, multiplied by 1 negative gives you negative, and then times x. So it's 24, negative 24 times x. So negative 24 times x.